It's been nearly 20 years since the release of Oblivion, and pretty much out of nowhere, Bethesda announced and released a remastered version. The beautiful scenery and bustling life of Cyrodiil have been revitalised in high quality glory, but along with Oblivion's beauty comes its dark and sinister secrets, and one of Oblivion's creepiest mysteries is the strange town of Hackdirt. Located deep in the Great Forest, close to the Hammerfall border, the isolated settlement of Hackdirt seems to have become extremely xenophobic. The inhabitants of this mining town are quite dismissive, and even quite hostile to outsiders including the hero Kvatch.
I got nothing to say to you, stranger. Outsiders have always tried to destroy us, but we've always survived.
Why are they so closed off? They often talk in riddles, and they meet in places veiled in mystery. The Chapel of Brethren is their place of meeting every night, where they recite the Bible of the Deep Ones. The Deep Ones are a race that are located deep underground, and can be faintly heard through the caverns beneath Hackdirt, where the residents descend to at night for their gatherings. It seems like there's some weird cult-like activity here. What are they actually doing? And who are the Deep Ones? The hero Kvatch is introduced with Hackdirt by the Argonian trader News, who is worried about their daughter, Dharma, who has gone missing after making a delivery to Hackdirt.
Normally I make the deliveries, but I wasn't feeling well, so Dharma insisted on going this time. I do hope nothing has happened to her.
Traces of Dharma can be found around Hackdirt, with her horse blossom being behind the general goods store, and her diary being found in a ransacked guest room. Dharma herself can be found in the depths of the Hackdirt caverns, containing tunnels that seem to connect to each of the cultists' house. She's surrounded by hostile humanoid creatures, referred to as the Brethren.
These creatures kidnapped me from my room in the inn while I was sleeping. I don't know why, but I'd rather not find out.
In the cave surrounding Dharma are many skeletal remains, perhaps those that came before her. It seems that the inhabitants of Hackdirt are kidnapping and then sacrificing people, perhaps to the Deep Ones that their Bible has been dedicated to. The Bible of the Deep Ones has a note by Erlab Moslem, stating that it was given to him by the Chief of the Deep Ones, an ancient law of his people, which his town shall follow from now until forever, signed in the year 345 of the Third Era. So maybe these ritualistic killings have been performed for a while now, but it is quite strange that Dharma herself was targeted by the townsfolk, while her mother, News, was not. Her mother was the one that made regular trades with the inhabitants of Hackdirt, and maybe was well known to be the trader of the town, and didn't want to ruin their relationship of trade with Coral. Then when Dharma makes her appearance, they don't take her as a trader, but a different outsider, putting her nose where she shouldn't, making her a target. Or perhaps she did something to infuriate the locals, as when their hero Kvatch visits Hackdirt, Bland Honda Moslem warns them.
If you're not careful, the Brethren will have to teach you a lesson.
He also goes on and discusses the history of Hackdirt.
My grandfather built this place, not that it's any of your business. We've been down, but we got plans to bring back the good old days. You'll see.
This does tie into the signing of the Bible of the Deep Ones, most likely by Van Honda's grandfather Erlab, which was done some 88 years ago. But this is where we start to see a discrepancy. In Elder Scrolls Online, if we travel through Cyrodiil, we can come across the much more bustling town of Hackdirt, without a chapel, or any sign of any tunnels, just appearing to be a large farming town. However, the town is infested by the Black Daggers, chasing away all of the original inhabitants, relocating them to a nearby refugee camp. Although neither these inhabitants or the Black Daggers seem to have been affected by the Deep Ones, but this does mean that the Moslems are not factually correct here. Hackdirt, in some vein, had been around for much longer than 88 years, but perhaps this was the time when the town was refounded, or the spiritual birth of connecting with the Deep Ones, because eventually the Deep Ones did manage to appear, and they seem to have entranced this entire town. This story is actually a reference to a H.P. Lovecraft story, Shadow over Innsmouth, where Robert Olmsted discovers a ruined town of Innsmouth and discovers that its inhabitants are also worshipping the Deep Ones. In Shadow over Innsmouth, the Deep Ones are described as having grey-green skin, fish-like heads and unblinking eyes. But in Oblivion, we actually never get to see who the Deep Ones are. The Lovecraft Deep Ones were offered human sacrifices by the inhabitants of Innsmouth in exchange for an abundance of fish and riches. They also bred with the Deep Ones, resulting in hybrid offspring that, when fully transformed as they age, would join the underwater city of Yahuntley, with the Deep Ones having plans to take over the surface one day. Robert Olmsted, like Dharma, stays at a hotel for the night. He hears noises as someone tries to enter his room, but unlike Dharma, Olmsted manages to escape. The discovery and alerting of Innsmouth leads to the US government deliberately burning and dynamiting the supposedly empty houses, with many arrests taking place. And something very similar happens to Hackdirt.
About 30 years back, there was some trouble out there. Bad trouble. Legion had to be called in. People killed. Some say the Legion burned the town to the ground, but it's still there for those that go looking for trouble. Still folks living up there, but no one you'd like to meet after dark.
And along with that, the Deep Ones of Hackdirt convey a sense that they will end up rising up and taking over Tamriel.
One day you'll find out who the Brethren are, and you'll be sorry. Oh yes.
The echoes of Lovecraft is strong in this eerie town of Hackdirt. So are the Deep Ones merely just an Easter egg? Or could there be a deeper resemblance of them in the game? Maybe there are some more clues within the Bible of the Deep Ones. The text here is coded, and when decoded, it is practically identical to the book Ngasta Kavata Kavakis. This was written by Ngasta, who is a powerful Slode necromancer, and this is the crux for the theory that the Slodes are actually the Deep Ones. Out of all the races throughout Tamriel, the Slodes do seem to be the most fish-like, which could be due to H.P. Lovecraft's inspiration. A possible problem for the Slodes being the Deep Ones is that they require water to be able to move, because of their extreme weight, and Hackdirt has a considerable lack of water. But there is a well located in Hackdirt, which does indicate that there is water underneath the town, perhaps deep underground, a place where the Deep Ones would reside. The White Squire has actually written a narrative of how Ngasta himself spawned the mysticism of the Deep Ones, having originally been granted the town by the Governor Richin, with Ngasta then experimenting upon its people. This could be possible, as in Redguard, Ngasta did have the whole island of Strosmakai under a spell, so why not just a town? While Ngasta does die before the events of Oblivion, it's not beyond reason that he had other Slodes, perhaps necromancers, in place to continue the illusion. Goink3368 discovered that in the Russian translation of Oblivion, the Deep Ones are called Deep Water Denizens, which actually does add credibility to the Slodes actually being the Deep Ones. But no Elder Scrolls mystery just has one solution. Some, such as Mr. Vivek, believe that the Deep Ones are being controlled by the antagonist of Oblivion, the Maroons Dagon. Going back to Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth, the cult within the town were worshipping a Deep One known as Father Dagon, which does have a similar name. The Bible of the Deep Ones before translation is also in Daedric runes, which Erlav Moslem states that the chief of the Deep Ones taught him this language and his runes. But this is really as far as this theory goes, and if this was actually the case, I would have expected them to play a much more integral role in Oblivion, perhaps being called like the Order of the Mythic Dawn to help Dagon in the Oblivion crisis. Camelworks was uncontent with these theories and proposed another. The Deep Ones are actually Daedra, not in service of Mehrunes Dagon, but Molag Bal. The Brethren of Hackdirt, the people who are closest to the Deep Ones, transitioned to become Deep Ones themselves, and they're supposed to be like vampires, hiding in caverns and avoiding the sunlight. According to Vampires of Vardenfell Book 2, Molag Bal is the father of vampires, so this transition would make sense. Jive, one of the members of the town, says that the Deep Ones helped them.
They helped us, made us rich, but there was a terrible price. Blood. And worse.
Perhaps the sacrifice that the town were making to the Deep Ones was in fact blood.
But they want blood, she says, or they'll not help us.
Like the Lovecraft citizens, the trading with the Deep Ones was for riches, and it cost them blood. But Jive also mentions worse than blood. Does that mean something else happens? Emerson44 has a similar theory to Camelworks, but actually believes that the Deep One is the active one Daedric prince, Clavicus Vile.
I'm not an expert on the Prince of Bargains, but it seems to me that this was all part of some grand plan.
The Book of Daedra states that Clavicus Vile's fear is the granting of power and wishes through ritual invocations and pact. Our slow suspect, Ngasta, is actually in servitude to Clavicus.
This one yaps at the scraps from no unstable Redguard. Clavicus Vile grants this one favors with every soul sent his way.
Clavicus also has an interest in blood.
Blood is nice, but your blood is not worth a soul, Cyrus.
Similar to how Ngasta sent souls to Clavicus, perhaps the Hackdirt citizens needed to perform a ritual to forfeit a soul to the Prince of Bargains. This blood could have been a key ingredient, with Jive saying, and worse, meaning that ultimately their soul was given away. But Zecramundus is not totally convinced by the vampire theories, as the Brethren, while trying to avoid sunlight, also have their vocabulary limited and have warped features such as larger eyes. Them changing into a vampire doesn't really explain this. A fish-like creature still seems more likely. Perhaps we are still missing some signs within the Elder Scrolls universe, or maybe even the Lovecraft universe. Hackdirt isn't actually the only place where references to Lovecraft can be seen. Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's plane of Oblivion, looks very similar to H.P. Lovecraft's universe in his book, The Call of Cthulhu. Elias Alias uses this to propose that perhaps the Deep Ones actually originate from this realm, the realm of H.P. Lovecraft. The creatures most likely responsible for this are the Lurkers, who are a species of Daedra, amphibious humanoids who would most definitely match a physical representation of the Deep Ones. This, like the previous two theories, would satisfy the Bible of the Deep One's surface layer text, if we were not to believe that a translation was intended. George Oldsturt8994 points out a quest in Oblivion that could share a hidden meaning to the Deep Ones, the Sunken One. The hero Kovac can stumble across the Shetcombe farm, a farmhouse that has become abandoned. A journal of the previous occupant, Slythe, can be read, where they mention this so-called Sunken One. The Sunken One has no pity, he has no mercy, he only sits below and passes sentence. And now, with a mighty stroke, he's toppled one of man's pitiful blight on his land. And yet, he still hungers. His appetite is ferocious. Ones with an eerie power, hidden deep below, the Sunken One does seem to have quite a few parallels with the Deep Ones. But unlike the Deep Ones, we can actually discover who the Sunken One actually is. This Sunken One turned out to be some dark form of storm Atronach. So could the Deep Ones be these same creatures? In my opinion, this loads the true cause of Hackdirt's undoing. Although maybe the mysteries of Hackdirt are still yet to be uncovered, with a much deeper, darker world waiting to be exposed as the Elder Scrolls universe unravels.